may have killed herself and is hoping Dr. G will find another explanation.
Their loved one dies in another city, and they're looking for me for answers.
And although the clues are scarce, Dr. G has her own hunch.
She's in the bathroom, face down. Maybe she slipped and fell on the water and hit her head. Alrighty, now, so we peel the scalp off and hit her head. That's a good place to look for bruising, and she didn't have any.
But Dr. G can't be certain until she removes Melinda's skull cap and looks inside for any internal bleeding.
And then I will take the calvarium off and look at the brain. But her brain didn't have any swelling, and when I slice it, it showed no evidence of hemorrhage. You name it, that brain didn't have it.
It's definitive. Melinda did not die of a head injury. But it's still possible that a fall in the bathroom caused fatal trauma elsewhere.
We've got the whole rest of the body to look at to hopefully come up with the cause of death. Okay.
Dr. G makes a standard Y-shaped incision, then peels back Melinda's skin and continues her search for signs of internal injury.
It could be broken ribs and a punctured lung. We want to look for rib fractures. We want to look for bruising.
She closely examines the organs in situ and is surprised by her findings.
There's really nothing like bleeding or bruising on the inside to say that had any role in her death. I think we've safely ruled out trauma.
With the prime suspect now ruled out, it's looking even more possible that Melinda may have succumbed to a long battle with depression and took her own life with a drug overdose. But the only way to find out for sure is to run a series of toxicology tests.
So I removed blood to check for drugs. That should be enough. We'll look to see if there are any substances that could have caused her death. And we'll take eye fluid, the vitreous fluid. We'll look at our eye chemistry because like a doctor can go and check your blood. I can't do that because your cells have already started to break up and all those things are messed up in your blood. But your eye fluid is still a little protected because there's no free cells, like your red blood cells that are breaking up in there. And so that will stay a little more pristine for a longer period of time. So the vitreous fluid is very important in somebody who's died because they will allow me to check some things which I normally wouldn't be able to check for after you die.
But the toxicology results won't be in for several weeks. For now, she pushes on with the autopsy, looking for anything that could help explain Melinda's sudden death.
So I have to take each organ out one by one and examine it.
She begins with the lungs, and right away, she spots trouble.
They don't look that great. They've got a lot of black pigment from smoking. They've already got some breakdown, what we call emphysema from smoking. So I have to take each organ out. Doesn't look like it's bad enough to kill her.
Still, Dr. G suspects that Melinda's heavy smoking may have caused her death by inducing heart disease. And that's where she goes next. Scalpel in hand, Dr. G carefully slices through the membrane that envelops the heart.
I open up the pericardial sac, there's no excess fluid, and of course, there's no free blood.
She then removes the heart from the chest cavity and dissects the arteries, where she immediately finds her first concrete clue.
She does have atherosclerosis, or narrowing to the coronary arteries, one of which is getting severe. Her right coronary artery was filled up 75% from plaque buildup. That's when it starts to get really critical and easily have problems with that. We often see it as a result of years of smoking.
Smoking contributes to heart disease in at least two ways: by constricting the arteries and by causing bad cholesterol to accumulate in the same narrowed vessels. In Melinda, Dr. G even finds damage in the aorta, the largest artery stemming from the heart.
Well, her aorta is typical of a long-term smoker. It's actually, the cholesterol is built up in the wall and it's kind of broken through the lining. And so it's just, you see this kind of gooey, necrotic stuff just coming out of the wall of your aorta. It is not a pretty sight.
Although Dr. G now has evidence that Melinda's smoking definitely took a toll on her heart, she doesn't see any sign of an acute heart attack, such as pale, dead tissue.
You know, the heart's a possibility. It's right there on the borderline of causing her problems. It's not a slam dunk, and we'll have to see what the rest of the autopsy shows.
Her next stop is the abdominal cavity, the stomach, spleen, and pancreas, where she's looking for any sign of natural disease.
Let's see what we have here.
Nothing's giving me any clear-cut indication of what went on.
But when she gets to Melinda's liver, she spots another clue.
This is a lot of fat on here.
It has kind of a pale yellowish appearance. It's enlarged. It's the anterior edge, the front of it is rounded. Usually you have a nice sharp edge. It really appears to have some what we call fatty metamorphosis, or fat within the cells. I'm seeing really a severe fatty liver.
Though severe, Dr. G doesn't believe it's fatal. But it is puzzling, because a fatty liver is most often caused by obesity or alcoholism. And Melinda has neither in her profile.
She's clearly not obese, and I don't have a history of drinking. But the number one reason for fatty liver is alcohol consumption.
Now Dr. G wonders if Melinda could have been hiding an alcohol problem from her niece, Bree.
Decedents give up their secrets to me in the morgue. Sometimes things that they don't tell their family, especially drugs, alcohol.
While the liver may reveal secrets about Melinda's life, it doesn't shed any new light on how she died. With the autopsy complete, Dr. G has just one chance left to uncover the truth behind this mysterious death. But a haunting scenario weighs heavily on her mind.
There's a possibility that it could be some type of overdose. So I'm hoping, toxicology is going to give me the answer. And we're just going to have to wait and see. What happened to her? How did she end up on the floor in her house?
Three weeks after Melinda Lopez is found dead on her bathroom floor, her toxicology report lands on Dr. G's desk. Melinda's niece, Bree, fears the worst, that her aunt tragically took her own life. Dr. G is hoping the report will tell a different story.
The first thing I look at is to see if there's any drugs or alcohol. She's negative on drugs and alcohol. It's clearly not an accidental overdose. It's clearly not a suicide.
It is an enormous relief to Bree. But the results pose another problem. Dr. G still has no idea what could have killed Melinda Lopez.
Sometimes at the end of the autopsy, you don't know why they died. I was hoping for the answer, because these are a lot of work when you can't figure it out and you got to start at square one and start kind of rethinking it out.
Line by line, she scours the rest of the toxicology report, looking for anything that could shed light on Melinda's death. And it isn't long before she comes across something unexpected in the vitreous levels.
When I look at that eye fluid, she has a high glucose level, which we typically see in somebody who is diabetic.
Diabetes. This would explain Melinda's fatty liver, because it's known to increase the risk of developing liver disease. But Melinda has no history of diabetes, and it rarely leads to an unexpected death.
But it's uncommon to see somebody dying at home from diabetes. So what's going on?
Then, Dr. G makes another discovery in Melinda's lab results, and she can hardly believe her eyes.
Something that I really didn't expect was there. It really all points to one thing. I know why she died.
It's a sunny fall day in Florida, but Melinda Lopez is having trouble enjoying it. She's stuck inside, feeling ill. But she has no idea how sick she really is.
Even though she probably didn't know, and no one in her family obviously knew, she had diabetes.
Toxicology results confirm that Melinda was suffering from diabetes, a condition that causes glucose levels to rise because the body is unable to produce enough insulin or is resistant to it.
Insulin is the hormone that is made by the pancreas that takes your blood sugar, your glucose, and brings it into your cells so your body can use that for energy. What happens is, without the insulin, the glucose levels just keep getting higher and higher in the blood, but your cells are starving. Your cells don't have any energy.
Melinda does her best to manage her mounting fatigue, but her body is growing increasingly starved of glucose.
When your body can't use glucose for fuel, it has to break down other things. And one of the things it breaks down is fat.
But burning fat for fuel causes a highly acidic byproduct, acetone, to build up in the blood. In the tox report, Dr. G saw that Melinda's acetone level was extremely elevated. And this is what gave her the final clue.
That acetone then starts making you feel horrible. As your blood becomes more and more acidic, your muscles ache, you feel like you have the flu, you're nauseated, you're vomiting, you have abdominal pain. She probably was having symptoms for an extended period of time.
And with no medical intervention, her condition eventually erupts into a full-blown crisis known as diabetic ketoacidosis.
Because of the increased acid in your blood, your organs don't work well, and you feel horrible. You go to the bathroom. So I don't think it's a coincidence that she dies in the bathroom. There gets to be a point when you just don't have enough fuel to the brain, and your brain stops functioning, and she passes out. And she's slipping further and further into a coma until she dies. She died from diabetes, but this is, 100% treatable. The root cause of why she died is that she ignored her symptoms and she didn't take care of herself. Why is it that she would ignore these symptoms? Maybe the bottom line is the depression that kept her from seeking help.
For Bree, the confirmation that Melinda didn't take her own life provides some measure of peace. But the revelation that her aunt disregarded so many warning signs comes as a sobering lesson.
You don't want to run to the doctor all the time, that's fine. But there are a few things you're just going to have to get checked out occasionally, and that's going to be your blood sugar, cholesterol level, and blood pressure, because those are silent killers and you may not have any symptoms. You just occasionally need to go to the doctor. If nothing else, get those 3 things checked.
A young man dies unexpectedly after eating a fish sandwich.
What went on between the fish sandwich and the next morning?
And as Dr. G puts the pieces together, all signs point to a bizarre case of food poisoning.
To die from it would be very unusual, but we see the unusual here.
And then, a woman is killed in a tragic car accident.
That oncoming car was a drunk driver.
But Dr. G knows there may be more to this accident than meets the eye.
I can't just put down car accident, cause of death. You know, how did this happen?
Altered lives, baffling medical mysteries, shocking revelations. These are the everyday cases of Dr. G, medical examiner. It's been a grueling week for Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Jan Garavaglia. She's seen more than her fair share of trauma and tragedy.
This is a little baby. Got run over by a golf cart.
But now Dr. G is off duty and on her way to a relaxing dinner with her husband at one of her favorite restaurants. But during the course of the meal, something goes seriously wrong.
I was eating fish at a very nice restaurant, and I started to actually have some swelling in my face, and I was getting a little bit of a problem with breathing. I said, I think something's happening to me. I was afraid I was going to die because it just came on so suddenly.
That evening, Dr. G suffers from a frightening bout of food poisoning. She is one of many. Each year in the United States, there are a staggering 76 million reported cases of food poisoning. And of those, approximately 5,000 result in death.
I was one of those 76 million cases that year that suffered some type of ill effect from food, but I certainly didn't die from it.
Unfortunately, Dr. G's next case may not be so lucky. It's 3 p.m. on a warm afternoon in May, but 29-year-old Hector Nolasco is spending it inside, suffering from extreme nausea and vomiting. He's been sick for 3 days now, and Hector's symptoms are showing no signs of letting up.
He was continually vomiting to the point where the sister was a little worried and spent the night with him.
The following morning, Hector's sister Layla is in the kitchen making breakfast when she hears a strange noise.
She runs upstairs, and he had collapsed while vomiting into the trash can. She immediately calls 911.
Within minutes, the paramedic team arrives on the scene.
They take him to the hospital. They try to resuscitate him, but it's too late.
Hector Nolasco is pronounced dead in the ER, just 3 weeks shy of his 30th birthday. Now it's up to Dr. G to figure out exactly how and why he died.
Okay, I gotta get my act together. These two are working and I gotta catch up with them.
Dr. G's first step is to review Hector's somewhat slim case file.
He's a 29-year-old fellow. He's an architect. No known medical history.
And according to his sister Layla, Hector was in perfect health.
She said he didn't use illicit drugs, didn't smoke. He seemed to live a very healthy lifestyle.
But then, Layla reveals a surprising detail that sheds new light on the investigation. Hector believed he knew what made him so sick.
What happened is that he had a fish sandwich about 4 days prior to death. After that, he started having vomiting and abdominal pain. He's pretty sure that the fish sandwich gave him some type of food poisoning.
In fact, Hector's abdominal pain becomes so severe that within 48 hours of eating the fish, he schedules an emergency appointment with his doctor.
He had told the doctor he had fish poisoning and the doctor was treating him.
But just 2 days later, Hector is dead. Initially, Dr. G is skeptical of Hector's self-diagnosis.
Just because he went into the doctor and said, I have food poisoning, and the doctor believes him, doesn't mean I'm going to believe him.
Truth is, deaths from fish-related poisonings are rare in the United States, especially in healthy adults. But Dr. G does have cause for alarm. 2 months earlier, a health alert from the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, came across her desk. It warned of a ciguatera outbreak among people who had eaten toxic fish caught in the northern Gulf of Mexico.
Well, Florida, we're part of the Gulf of Mexico. So it did pique my interest. Maybe he could have one of those rare cases of ciguatera poisoning.
But despite her 21 years of work in the morgue, Dr. G has had little experience with this rare type of food poisoning. Luckily, she has the perfect teacher on hand, an infectious disease specialist named Dr. Mark Wallace, who also happens to be her husband.
Oh, I love working with Mark. You just bounce things off of him by trying to... So when I got word that I had a possible food poisoning in the morgue, well, he was the first person I turned to. And I mean literally turned because we drive to work together. Mark, what do you know about food poisoning? Oh, by George, I just gave a lecture on fish food poisoning. I don't have that in my knowledge base.
Yeah, I can look it up.
Okay. He's very helpful, besides being sweet.
Ciguatera is a serious illness, and it occurs when people eat grouper or jacks or barracuda in particular. Those reef fish can be contaminated with this toxin, and when people ingest this, they can get very sick.
In fact, people suffering from ciguatera often experience the exact same symptoms as Hector: nausea, vomiting, and abdominal pain. But there can also be strange neurological side effects.
People can describe all sorts of weird neurologic things. When they touch things that are cold, they think they're hot, or vice versa. They think that their teeth are loose and about to fall out.
The mechanism of death with ciguatera is either cardiac or respiratory failure.
People either stop breathing due to profound weakness, or the toxin can actually depress the function of the heart, and they can have heart failure.
But there's one problem with the diagnosis. Ciguatera is rarely fatal.
It's thought that about 1 in 1,000 people who get ciguatera die from it.
To die from it would be very unusual, but we see the unusual here. I love it when we have weird things in the morgue.
Still, Dr. G knows that there's a lot more at stake here than cracking the mystery behind a sudden, unexplained death. Bottom line, if Hector died from ciguatera poisoning, a whole lot of people could be at risk.
If it is food poisoning and he got it from that restaurant needs to know, and the health department needs to know.
Now, Dr. G's first priority is to identify the exact type of fish Hector ate and test it.
Oh, yeah, it's absolutely.
To that end, she wastes no time enlisting the help of the county health department.
We went ahead and asked them, could you check and figure out what kind of fish it was for us?
Okay, let's see.
In the meantime, Dr. G and her team prep Hector for the external exam to see what clues can be gathered directly from his body.
I can't wait to do the autopsy and see what I find. So when I look at him, he certainly looks like he was healthy.
Dr. G's first step is to examine Hector's face and mouth.
Ooh, bad.
Immediately, she notices a contusion on his upper forehead.
Look at that. Did you take a picture of that, Tim?
His face has a bruise,
Yeah, that's good.
which I'm assuming is when he fell onto the trash can, which he was vomiting in. That's not a pleasant way to die.
Let me see his mouth first. Hold on.
And his oral cavity has some bite marks to the lips. Oftentimes, I'll see that from resuscitation, pressing the lips onto the teeth.
Boy, whoever did CPR on him really did it aggressively. Alrighty.
But it isn't long before Dr. G discovers something highly unusual.
Oh, gosh.
Something that could change the entire course of the investigation.
I can't sit there and worry about what the ramifications are. I have to focus on getting the answer. That's my job, and that's why I do it.
Dr. G is carefully examining the body of 29-year-old Hector Nolasco, whose family believes that he was a victim of fish-related food poisoning. And with a recent alert from the FDA about a Ciguatera outbreak, Dr. G could have a potential health scare on her hands.
We have a lot of people just standing by to get some things in motion. The health department, his family, they want to know why he died.
But in the morgue, assumptions can be dangerous.
One mistake you make in forensics is you come up with a hypothesis and then you kind of like blind yourself to any other possibilities. You have to keep your options open. Maybe he has something else wrong with him. Maybe he's got an infection in his belly. Maybe he's got something wrong with his bowels. You know, there's maybes, and I can't be blindsided by he thinks he's got food poisoning.
You get the sides of the neck, too?
Sure enough, just as Dr. G's wrapping up the external exam, she spots something completely unexpected.
Ooh, what was that?
His hands have classic clubbing of the distal aspects of the fingers. And the nail is kind of curved upward, and you kind of get a bulbous appearance.
The physical finding of clubbed fingers is nonspecific. It can indicate anything from heart and lung disease to some forms of cancer. But the deformity, along with Hector's symptoms, raises a possibility that Dr. G had not previously considered.
I'm wondering if this guy has Crohn's disease.
Crohn's is a debilitating autoimmune disease in which the body's immune system literally attacks the gastrointestinal tract.
He does have clubbing, and that is associated with a Crohn's disease, which is associated with abdominal pain. So that'll be interesting to look for.
All right, you want to take your picture?
Although Hector had no history of chronic illness, and the disease is rarely fatal, Crohn's is a definite possibility. But considering the recent FDA alert, Ciguatera is still high on Dr. G's list of suspects.
So at this point, we're just kind of putting the building blocks together of what I'm finding.
Dr. G begins the internal exam by performing the standard Y incision, fully revealing the internal organs.
Let's see what we have here.
And immediately she spots something amiss.
Wow, look at that.
I see that he's got about 400 cc's of kind of a amber color fluid collected in his abdominal cavity.
400 cc's is a significant amount of fluid, almost 2 cups worth.
So that's our first hint that something's wrong.
Dr. G goes on to discover more of this fluid in Hector's pleural space, the body cavity that contains the lungs. But in order to determine what caused the strange buildup of fluids in the first place, she'll need to take a closer look at Hector's heart and lungs.
Heart looks good.
It's nice to see a normal heart, and he had one.
And the lungs, though heavy with fluid, do not look especially diseased or infected.
There's many things that can cause fluid. So it's a non-specific finding, but he's certainly ill.
And given Hector's symptoms of stomach pain and nausea, she wastes no time zeroing in on the abdominal cavity.
Immediately, you can see there's something wrong in the abdomen. He's got reddening of the mesentery, the tissues that hold the bowel gets inflamed. And there's patchy areas of little necrosis, little pieces of areas of fat just appear to be, dying.
This discovery only furthers Dr. G's theory that Hector indeed suffered from Crohn's disease, because Crohn's causes inflammation in the bowel wall, which can lead to perforations or tears, ultimately damaging the mesentery.
What else we got going on here?
But to find out for sure, she must examine all 25 feet of Hector's bowels.
I need to still look at those bowels. And you got something for me to put them in?
The bowel examination is a standard step in most autopsies, but it's not a popular one.
Well, it's never fun to have to open the entire bowel. It's not something my techs like to do. In fact, I know they dislike it so much that I usually open it myself because I know what I'm looking for.
Yet despite an exhaustive inspection, the initial findings are disappointing.
There's really nothing here.
His bowels look completely normal on the inside. Nothing out of the ordinary.
Everything looks good.
At this point, Dr. G still doesn't know what caused the inflammation to the mesentery, but she can now be certain of one thing.
He had absolutely no evidence of Crohn's.
But if Hector didn't suffer from Crohn's, what caused his clubbed fingers?
Most likely, the clubbing of his fingers is probably just inherited. If I looked at the father, probably his father has it too.
Then, just as Dr. G is ruling out the Crohn's theory, the autopsy is interrupted by her chief medical investigator, Steve Hansen.
I do get word that the health department contacted the restaurant and the type of fish that they used for the sandwich was tilapia.
Tilapia is a freshwater fish and is not associated with ciguatera.
It had nothing to do with the type of fish that you get ciguatera poisoning with. I still think ciguatera poisoning was an interesting red herring, and I'm almost disappointed it wasn't.
But if neither food poisoning nor Crohn's disease killed Hector, what did? Dr. G suspects the answer may lie in one of the organs underneath the inflamed mesentery.
This is an area where your stomach is, where your lower portion of your liver is, and beneath that is where your pancreas is.
One by one, she carefully examines each organ. And it isn't long before Dr. G uncovers a shocking new clue.
Oh, look at that.
Not what I expected, but that could clearly explain everything.
All right, back to the case at hand.
Dr. G has just discovered a serious problem embedded deep within the abdominal cavity of 29-year-old Hector Nolasco.
Oh my God. Look at that.
The pancreas doesn't look good. So I take the pancreas out, and it's clearly inflamed.
I've never seen it that bad.
That pancreas was bad looking. That was an inflamed, dead pancreas.
There's no question Dr. G has found her culprit.
It's clearly an acute pancreatitis. You know, most people, when they get pancreatitis, it's usually mild and they get over it. You know, it's painful, it's uncomfortable, but they get over it.
But in Hector's case, the damage to his pancreas was so extensive that death was inevitable. Still, there's a fundamental question left unanswered.
I wanted to know why. Why did he get the pancreatitis?
One of the main causes of acute pancreatitis is gallstones. Gallstones are hard, pebble-like particles that form in the gallbladder. However, if they're flushed out of the gallbladder and obstruct the pancreatic duct, they can potentially block the pancreas's release of digestive enzymes, with fatal results.
You block that pancreatic duct, and then you have a buildup of pressure, and those enzymes start breaking down that tissue. That's why your pancreas gets inflamed, because it's getting basically digested inside of you.
But there's one problem. During Hector's autopsy, Dr. G failed to find a single gallstone.
He had absolutely no evidence of gallstones.
The second most common cause of pancreatitis is alcohol. But once again, Hector Nolasco appears to be an unlikely candidate.
I have no history that he drank at all. As far as I know, he gets the fish, he gets sick, he goes home. What went on between the fish sandwich and the next morning when he really started vomiting.
Now, Dr. G wonders if Hector may be one of a small percentage of people in which the cause of acute pancreatitis is simply unknown. At a standstill, she reaches out again to the person who knew Hector best, his sister Layla.
I talked to the sisters. She's devastated. This is a guy that they all looked up to in the family. He had a bright future ahead of him.
But then, Layla reveals a surprising detail about her brother. For Dr. G, it's the missing link. And now she can finally piece together the last moments of Hector Nolasco's all too brief life. Four days prior to his sudden death, Hector orders a fish sandwich while out to lunch with a friend. But their day of fun doesn't end there.
After eating that fish, he actually went out with his friend, and they went to multiple bars.
According to his sister, Hector was not a habitual drinker, but that evening he makes an exception.
We don't know how much he drank, but he was possibly binging that night. He goes home, sleeps it off, and in the morning he is not feeling well. He's vomiting, he has abdominal pain. He thinks that it's just the food poisoning.
But Hector does not have food poisoning. Instead, he's developed acute pancreatitis.
Although it's unusual for just one binge to cause pancreatitis, it's not unheard of. Nobody really knows why some people with alcohol use get pancreatitis and some people don't. This guy drank a lot less than most people, most college students probably that night, and yet he got pancreatitis.
Unfortunately, it isn't long before Hector's pancreas becomes severely inflamed, triggering tremendous abdominal pain.
The cells of his pancreas are actually breaking down and dying. That's making him very nauseated. Now, the biggest part of the pancreas is the formation of digestive juices that then help digest food.
These acidic juices proceed to leak out of the pancreas and literally begin digesting the fat in Hector's abdominal cavity.
Now, if it's digesting food in your bowel, think what it could do to the fat in your abdomen. And that's exactly what was happening. It was starting to actually digest and break down the fat. That's all those little white spots and inflammation and reddening that I see going on in the abdominal cavity.
Misdiagnosed as food poisoning, Hector's pancreatitis goes undetected. Eventually, his pancreas dies, setting into motion a deadly chain of events.
You have dead tissue inside your abdomen, you don't do well. It's actually causing organ failure. His heart's not working as well. His kidneys probably aren't working as well. His vessels are starting to leak.
Fluid rapidly begins to collect in his abdominal and pleural cavities.
And he collapses.
Incredibly, the man who came in as a possible victim of a rare fish toxin is leaving as the casualty of something far different. It's a sad end to a young, vibrant life that came much too soon for the loved ones he left behind.
The family couldn't believe it at first. They all bought into it that it was food poisoning. But the facts don't lie. We have the culprit, and the culprit's pancreatitis.
But there is some consolation. Hector's death may hold an important message for his sister.
But when I asked the sister if there was anybody else in the family that had pancreatitis or had died of pancreatitis, and she knew of no one. It may not be hereditary, but some people seem to be more predisposed to it than others, and he must have been. So maybe she is predisposed, and it gives her, something to think about if she's going to drink a lot of alcohol, that maybe for her it wouldn't be the best thing.
In the end, Dr. G knows that had Hector's condition been identified earlier, it's possible that his fatal pancreatitis could have been prevented.
It's a shame the doctor didn't pick up on it. And, that's one of the problems with having that kind of tunnel vision. He comes in, He says he has food poisoning and the doctor treats him for food poisoning. I don't think the doctor made a mistake. The only thing he didn't pick up on is how bad his pain was. Because his pain was really out of proportion for food poisoning, but very common for pancreatitis.
Okay, you try. Thank you.
After 20 years of performing autopsies, Dr. G has seen her share of natural disease and the tragedy it can leave in its wake. But when it comes to sudden deaths, there are few more overwhelming than the traffic fatalities that have been arriving at her morgue almost non-stop since the day she first walked through its doors.
When you work in a morgue and you see almost daily somebody dying from a car accident, that's a lot of people.
As chief medical examiner of the District 9 morgue in Florida, Dr. Jan Garavalia is all too familiar with the dangers of driving.
It's typical for us on a weekend to have an automobile case.
And now that her youngest son's approaching driving age, that insight is hitting very close to home.
It's a year and a half till he gets his permit. I'm already dreading it. So I was telling him today about how dangerous it is for young men to get their license because the statistics of them having an accident their first year is just extraordinarily high. And I go, I just love you too much for you to, get hurt. And he just grabs my hand and squeezes it. He goes, I won't, Mom.
But Dr. G still has good reason to worry.
In District 9, we see 300 car accidents a year. And that's about 18% of my workload, which is quite a lot.
Sadly, her next case is another such victim. A 42-year-old woman named Betsy Trumbull.
So we have a white female who yesterday didn't know she was going to be in our morgue, who today is in my morgue.
According to the investigator's report, Betsy, a nurse at a local hospital, is on her way home after a busy shift when her routine commute takes a sudden and tragic turn.
She was trying to make a left-hand turn, and in that split second, she gets hit by another vehicle.
The driver of the other vehicle is a 39-year-old man named Charlie Wilcox. He's injured, but remains conscious and manages to call 911. When paramedics arrive, they find Betsy in her mangled car, barely clinging to life. On the way to the hospital, they work desperately to keep her alive.
But she pretty much was dead by the time they got there.
It then falls to Highway Patrol investigator Robert Blackwell to deliver the devastating news to Betsy's parents.
The fatalities are very, very emotional, but our job is to tell family members that their family members have died. It's hard a lot of times to deal with the family's grief.
And their pain is only made worse when they learn the circumstances of the crash.
They did a breath test on the other driver. He had a .12. That oncoming car was a drunk driver. I think when you find out that your loved one is killed by a drunk driver, I think your first response is anger. You immediately want to blame that drunk driver.
Betsy's parents fully expect the driver to be charged and ultimately jailed for his actions. But it's not that simple. And while it's clear Charlie was driving under the influence, police can't just assume he's responsible for Betsy's death.
State law specifically states that a driver under the influence of alcohol has to cause or contribute to causing the crash.
That means if Betsy is deemed to be the driver at fault, the drunk driver could walk away with nothing more than a DUI. However, if there's no evidence to suggest she played a role in the crash, Charlie could be looking at up to 15 years in prison.
Each car accident is investigated to try to figure out what happened the best we can. And when we look at the human factor, the autopsy is an integral part of that car accident investigation.
In this autopsy, Dr. G has two main goals. First, figure out exactly what killed Betsy. And second, search for anything that might suggest that Betsy herself was responsible for the crash. One scenario she'll be paying particular attention to is whether a heart attack or some other medical event could have caused her to lose control of the car.
When you look at natural disease playing a role in the accident, it's usually fairly small, but it's something we still look at. Also, she's on an antidepressant and she's on a benzodiazepine or an anti-anxiety medication. Now, these are medications, if high enough, could certainly impair you. So we just will have to do a complete autopsy to really figure out if toxicology or natural disease played any role in causing the accident. Okie dokie. Let's go for it.
Right off the bat, it's obvious that the crash took a toll on Betsy's body.
When you look at her, she looks like she's been in a car accident. Oh, gosh. She certainly has a lot of abrasions on her face, a laceration on her chin. Oh, bruise there. Very classic look for an automobile accident. Bruised arm. She's got contusions on her body. She's got, abrasions on the knees. She's got an obvious arm fracture on the right. Where's that fracture? It's just right at the elbow, right?
Yeah.
Betsy's broken arm is especially typical of a crash.
We often see that with drivers. They tend to have the forearm fractures more so than passengers. The theory is that they've grasped the steering wheel and locked their wrists, and that causes the fracture.
But as Dr. G zeroes in on Betsy's torso, she spots the most gruesome injury yet.
Something's got to be going wrong there. I see a very extensive abrasion across the abdomen.
And suddenly, she realizes the very thing that could have saved Betsy's life may have actually been what killed her.
Oh gosh, she's a mess.
Dr. G has just discovered an enormous contusion across the abdomen of 42-year-old Betsy Trumbull, who was killed in a car accident by a drunk driver just 24 hours earlier.
She's got a very vivid, very prominent abrasion across her abdomen with a larger abrasion near her right hip and then an abrasion that's over 12 inches going across slightly diagonal on her lower abdomen.
And right away, she can tell that this injury was caused by her seatbelt.
Mainly, a seatbelt is designed to keep you from being ejected, slow your deceleration, and it's designed to keep you from impacting things on the inside of the car. They clearly play a role in decreasing the severity of the accident and keeping people alive. But occasionally they do cause injury.
And as she inspects Betsy's seatbelt injury more closely, the telltale pattern gives her a clue.
She's got such a prominent abdominal abrasion, but not a shoulder strap abrasion.
Dr. G now knows that Betsy was wearing her seatbelt incorrectly.
Although the lap belt was on, clearly The sash was not in the proper position.
We've done studies on the use of seatbelts here in Orange County and Osceola County, and roughly 60 to 68% of all motorists wear their seatbelt. I would have to say 5 to 10% of those that are wearing their seatbelts don't wear it properly. They'll wear it underneath their arm. They'll throw the shoulder harness back behind them. If you're not wearing a shoulder harness at all, you could be thrown around inside the vehicle and cause internal injuries.
This can cause very severe internal injuries to your bowel, to the mesentery that hold the bowel, and to your spine. But we're not going to know exactly what her internal injuries are by just looking at her externally. We've got to go internal. So when I do my Y incision, right off, I find injury.
Uh-oh.
That seatbelt injury actually cut the muscle, cut the subcutaneous fat, and ended up tearing also the mesentery, the tissues that hold the bowel.
But as Dr. G digs deeper, the news only gets worse.
Oh, my.
There's blood in her abdomen. Most likely, she's gone across the seatbelt, and the seatbelt acted like a knife, cutting that abdomen completely in half, and that caused her blood.
With the help of her morgue tech, Dr. G ladles the blood out of her abdominal cavity.
It can be messy, especially if it's a traumatic injury. We just basically assist her by holding the picture there, and we'll kind of shift around some organs, and she'll ladle out the blood.
We have a picture that actually has measuring increments on it that'll tell us how many cc's of fluid is in there.
Dr. G measures 800 cc's.
As much as I thought.
But she doesn't believe this blood loss was enough to have killed her.
Okay.
Although the improperly worn seatbelt clearly inflicted significant damage, it doesn't appear to have caused Betsy's death. But the exam is far from over.
Okay. Let's see what's going on here.
Often very common in automobile accidents are tears to the liver, tears to the spleen. But miraculously enough, those are intact.
Next, Dr. G turns her attention to Betsy's upper body. And right away, she spots trouble.
Well, oh my gosh.
She's got 1,400 milliliters of blood in her pleural cavity. That's a lot of blood. That is enough to kill her. Whatever caused that blood is really what caused her death. So now I have to figure out, why does she have that?
Carefully, she inspects the chest organ, searching for signs of injury, like a puncture or tear that would explain the bleeding.
I look at her heart, and I look at her heart sac, and that's still intact. I looked at both of the lungs. Both of the lungs are intact.
But then, just behind the heart and lungs, she finally spots the source of the fatal bleed.
Wow, look at that.
She's got a transected or complete tear to her aorta, the main blood vessel that pumps blood to the rest of your body. This tear is right where the aortic arch becomes tethered to her spine. If you decelerate quickly, your body will stop quickly, but the heart and the movable aorta will keep moving until it rips off.
She now believes that because Betsy was not wearing her shoulder strap, her upper body flew forward on impact, tearing the aorta. And with the body's largest blood vessel ripped open, Betsy would have bled to death within minutes.
This is clearly the cause of death, and it's clearly due to the automobile accident.
Dr. G now knows exactly how Betsy died, but there are still questions to be answered. First and foremost, could some type of natural disease, like a heart attack or stroke, have caused Betsy to lose control of her car in the first place?
You know, occasionally the medical condition of the driver plays a role in the accident. So you always want to do a complete autopsy and make sure that something really bizarre hasn't happened.
It's a fine line, but there's a lot of factors we need to take into consideration just in a simple crash. Obviously, something went wrong. So what was happening at the time of the crash?
To find out, Dr. G examines Betsy's organs one by one, searching for signs of natural disease.
Okay, let's see.
First, she dissects the heart, looking for evidence of a heart attack or other problems that could have hindered Betsy's driving.
And I look very carefully. I don't see any.
She now has only one more place to look: the head.
You know, the head, did she have a stroke? Did she have, a tumor? Did she have anything that would have caused her to not act correctly?
Gently, she extracts the brain, searching for clues.
She doesn't have any skull fractures, and I don't see any contusion or bruising of the brain.
She digs deeper, dissecting the organ for any abnormality or illness. But after a thorough inspection, she comes up empty-handed.
And I didn't find any natural disease.
These negative findings suggest that Betsy was most likely in full control of her car when she crashed. But before Dr. G can close the case, she has one last thing to check.
It could be some of the medication she's taking. We know that she's on a benzodiazepine, which at high enough doses can cause you to be under the influence. We know she's on an antidepressant, and high enough levels could cause her to be sleepy. The autopsy report truly isn't finished and will not go out until that toxicology is done.
One long month after Betsy Trumbull's autopsy, toxicology results arrive from the lab. So far, it seems that Charlie Wilcox, the drunk driver that hit her, is entirely at fault. If that evidence holds, he could be looking at significant jail time for her death. But Dr. G must still confirm whether Betsy's medication was a factor in the crash. Line by line, she begins reading through the report, and at first, nothing seems amiss.
I don't find any benzodiazepine in her system. That didn't play a role. And her antidepressant was at a very low level.
But as her eye moves down the page, one unexpected finding stops her dead in her tracks.
I'm actually quite surprised. It's clearly the reason why she drove in front of the oncoming vehicle.
And now, with all the facts laid bare, Dr. G can finally piece together this sequence of events that culminated in this fatal yet avoidable accident. It's late afternoon in Orlando, and Betsy Trumbull is on her way home. But her driving is unsteady, and her judgment and coordination are impaired. And based on the toxicology report, Dr. G now knows why.
She has a blood alcohol level higher than the guy that hit her. She's got a 0.16. That's twice the legal limit. Although the other guy was drunk, she's even drunker.
This leads Dr. G to believe that on the day of her death, Betsy did not go straight home after work.
Most likely, she was out with friends and drinking. She doesn't usually drink, but that night they appeared to be celebrating for whatever reason.
Betsy consumes more alcohol than her body can process, and it isn't long before her central nervous system begins to feel the effects.
I mean, at a blood alcohol level of 0.16, she's going to have some major problems with coordination. Some people, they can barely stand at that level. Her perception, her judgment is off.
She's going to have a loss of critical judgment, impairment of memory and comprehension. She's going to have a decreased sensory response.
Highly intoxicated, Betsy makes a choice that's irresponsible and extremely dangerous.
She gets into the car and decides to drive drunk. A fatal mistake. Very fatal mistake on her part.
And then, the final coup de grace.
When she gets into the car, she puts her seatbelt on wrong.
Unprotected and very drunk, Betsy hits the road. All is fine until she gets to the fateful intersection.
In that split second, she misjudged the car coming at her, cutting it a little too close, and gets hit by the oncoming car. Her car stops with a sudden deceleration. Her pelvis is anchored. That seatbelt cuts across her anterior abdominal muscles. And then when her body slams against the dashboard or the steering wheel, the body stops, but her heart and arch of the aorta keep moving forward.
At that moment, the aorta, which is partially tethered to the spine, simply rips wide open.
All the blood that's being pumped from the heart is going now into just your pleural cavity. And as your heart beats, the rest of your body isn't getting any blood. Your blood pressure plummets. And by the time the paramedics got there, there was already too much internal damage, too much bleeding that anything could have been done. Within several minutes, she's dead.
Dr. G reports her findings to the Florida Highway Patrol. The forensic evidence clears the other driver of all charges except a DUI, and Betsy is ruled the at-fault driver.
I truly believe that the cause of the accident was because of her impairment in making this left-hand turn.
Then, she makes the difficult call to Betsy's parents.
I called the family with the results, and, they were devastated. They knew she occasionally had a drink, but they didn't have any clue that she drank to excess.
It's a painful reality, and Dr. G can only hope that ultimately the truth will help them come to terms with their daughter's untimely death.
I doubt that she died in a lot of pain. That's always comforting to the family. What's interesting about the family, he still thanked me for the care I gave his daughter, the respect I gave her body, and the way we treated her. And that was very nice. His worst time in his life, he was still gracious enough to thank me for the care I gave his daughter.
A devastated mother finds her baby dead in his crib.
4-month-old little boy has a twin sister.
Can Dr. G solve this heartbreaking case and save the twin from a similar fate?
There is a chance this child has an undetected congenital abnormality, and that other twin is in danger too.
Then, a young father dies under mysterious circumstances.
They say he's in perfect health. How could he have died?
Now Dr. G must uncover what took a father from his children in the prime of his life.
Something is going on, and I don't know what it is.